we're very grateful to have you along tonight, Kaytee, and really looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much.
I will hand over to you now.
Oh, thank you, and thanks everybody. What a privilege to be here. What we're going to be talking about is diagnosis and some of the things that you can do in order to help with MS. So these are usually the big things that come up. What am I supposed to eat? Oh my God, I've heard no dairy, no gluten. Seriously? Can I still have coffee? And what about alcohol? We've got some big events coming up, and I've heard that alcohol's not good for my gut and my immune system. What foods and supplements are best, and is your lifestyle really important? So we've got a lot to cover. I might brush over a few things, but the first thing is that this is for educational purposes only. I'm not a medical professional. Please seek advice from a professional medical practitioner with anything that we're talking about today. So that's just the first port of call. What I did want to talk about is understanding the immune system. And interestingly enough, there's a big difference between when we have a normal functioning immune system and when it starts to get confused. So typically what happens with our immune response is acquired as over time. We get it from our mother's breast milk. We get our natural acquired immunity through being exposed to certain things. Sometimes our immune system can get a little bit, let's say, confused. So when that happens, we don't always kind of have the ability to switch that system down. And so when an autoimmunity or when an autoimmune condition starts to kind of come into fruition, we don't have the ability to just turn it off. And this has been something that has been going on for centuries, and sometimes we just don't understand why. So what I know from my research is that there's a few things that we do understand about autoimmunity, and we know that it can be brought on by infection. So whether that's Epstein-Barr, whether that's SARS-CoV-2, whether it's immune stress. So for example, you have hay fever and then you get very, very stressed and your immune system drops. It can be from allergies, it can be from genetics, and it can be from toxins. And it may be one or multiple things that actually end up causing autoimmune diseases, but we know that there are multiple triggers that can lead to it. So what we're going to cover a little bit today is things that relate to leaky gut, which is when your gut becomes permeable and your immune system takes a big hit because things will actually leach through the gut into the bloodstream. So that's going to be our main port of call today. And what I think can be really confusing and overwhelming is that usually over the last 60, 70, 80 years, we have been told specific things like, for example, the food pyramid. You should never eat much or very little from the foods up the very top and eat as much as possible from the foods down the bottom. That has almost done a 180 flip. So a lot of the research that's gone on in the last century doesn't actually equate to being science now. What we do know is that over the course of the last little while, we have gone back to eating real food. So the best bet diet was actually originated quite some time ago for autoimmune and MS, well, MS autoimmune. But if you see, it's got no dairy, no legumes, no gluten, which is a protein we'll talk soon about that has an effect on the immune system and opens up the tight junctions of the gut, and means that if this was gluten, it falls through the cracks and into the bloodstream where it causes a bit of havoc. So these diets, you probably, if anyone's new to the Dr. Well's protocol, so she was famously in a wheelchair and completely turned her diet around. However, it was a lot of food. So it was kilos of plant-based foods every day. She got into fasting, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of time to cover fasting. the research that she looked into was based on a guy called Dr. Voltalongo, who mimicked a fast for 5 days. And some of the research that's come out of that has been an increase and regrowing of myelinate sheaths. So the remyelination of the sheaths was only after 5 days of mimicking a fast, which is a very reduced amount of calories. So you're literally still starving, but it caused a lot of change in something called apoptosis of unhealthy cells and a cleaning up of the inside parts of us. So this is a really interesting space to look into, fasting, and I think this will grow quite significantly over the next wee while. I have quite a few clients that do fasting. One who had rheumatoid arthritis, and after her 3rd day of just fluids, and I'm talking about herbal teas and bone broth, all her pain in her joints went away, and after 5 days she was able to walk without any crutches. So she wasn't that much pain. So I'm a big fan of fasting, but it has to be under controlled situations if it's going to be extended. The other one that I really love to talk about, which is quite interesting, is the AIP diet, and that's autoimmune protocol, which I will have available, and I'll actually send Nicola a copy of this so that you have access to it. It's called the Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook, and there's some great research going into this currently that will be published in the next couple of years. So the AIP diet basically is no grains, no legumes, things that may aggravate the gut. So nuts and seeds either, no eggs, anything that's immune stimulating that removes all gut irritating foods. So we don't have anything that's going to cause inflammation in the gut. Bring those foods back in to the diet, reintroduce them to find out what foods are the most problematic. This has been nothing short of fascinating for me because I'm seeing quite significant changes in my clients. So I'm really interested to know if anyone would like to give that a go, how they find it. It's quite difficult to start with, but I think it's something that shows great promise. So the big picture with this is, if you think that your diet may need a little bit of a hand, what are our kind of main principles? And the big thing is eat anything that grows below the ground, above the ground, flies, swims, runs. Keep it simple. And the research on the Mediterranean diet, which is high in olive oil, and there's some interesting chemicals in olives that seem to be one of the major reasons that the Mediterranean diet is so well established as being positive. So that would be fresh fish, it's lots of olive oil, fresh produce. I think also maybe the fact that they get good sun, maybe they eat locally, markets. The previous research on the early Dr. Swank talked about not doing fats, but John Hopkins is doing some research on the ketogenic diet and autoimmune diseases. So watch the space. I have been doing this as a trial for some of my clients who really want to give it a go. And so far we're seeing some really good benefits. So when it comes to diets, there is no such thing as one diet working for everybody. It just doesn't work. And if someone tells you that the ketogenic diet works for everybody, I would say run. If they say that the wild diet works for everybody, I'd say run as well. You literally may have to just try some things out. And if it's as simple as cutting out refined carbohydrates, like maybe you go to the bakery most days for a filled roll and a slice, it could be making leftovers, like making double the leftovers and taking some for lunch to work the next day, so you're not reaching for as much sugar. Please don't blame your specialists for not knowing that much about nutrition. They don't do that much of it at university. It's not something that medical school teaches. So most of the time you might find that 15 hours max for basic information is all they get given. So it's not their fault. They've got lots of other interesting and more important things to be researching and studying. So yeah, please, I just needed to say that, because if they don't know, that's okay. We have to be our own health advocates. And so that's why a big proponent of the anti-inflammatory diet is going to be foods that are high in produce. They're real food. And remember that anything that's grown in soil, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be full of nutrients, because what happens if that soil hasn't been rotated? It's devoid of nutrients. For example, I know in New Zealand we do lack quite a few minerals in our soil, so don't expect some foods to be really high. It may actually be important to supplement with the multivitamin in some stages, in some cases. The low fats, they used to talk a lot about having a low fat diet as an anti-inflammatory, but interestingly enough, we're seeing that the ketogenic diet is also showing levels of reducing CRP and inflammation. The red meats to a minimum is up for debate. So for some people, some of the best forms of nutrient dense food is actually liver. Like, you know, liver that you make pate with. So I'm a big proponent of that. It's got more nutrients and minerals than any other food on the planet. So a small amount of organic chicken liver pate, or chicken liver that you can just make up and put into a ramekin, or you can mix it in with mincemeat if you eat mince, or you could mix it in with some sort of food to make like a bolognese. That seems to be a good way to hide it in food. And interesting, back in the day, liver was reserved for the chief of the village, pregnant and breastfeeding women, and those going out to fight for their tribe. What is now a real mainstay with autoimmune is going grain and dairy free, or trying to minimize it as much as possible. More so gluten. There's some really good information on how gluten can actually increase and progress MS, which I'll show you a little bit later. So what happens is, it's so frustrating, and I hate to say it, but getting rid of gluten, I've put it here actually, you may have heard that if you deal with MS, it is wise to keep gluten and perhaps even dairy out of your diet. It's really hard to kind of focus on this if bread and milk are your major staples. So if you have bread for breakfast, or you might have Wheat Bix for breakfast, it might be that you do a sandwich for lunch or a roll, and then dinner is stew and bread or something like that. But we do know that it does make a big difference. And the gluten is a protein that's found not only in wheat, but also in barley and rye. And the protein's called gliadinin, and it's really similar to an enzyme, transglutaminase, which is throughout the body. And it's really transglutaminase is helpful for making chemical bonds that we need. Funnily enough, what happens is if you have MS and you consume too much gluten, or just even small quantities, it produces antibodies that attacks the transglutaminase in the myelin sheath. Now, what does that even mean in English? Basically, what it means is that, and this was research published last year, was that those that have gliadinin or gluten found in, what do we say, barley, rye, and wheat, can actually progress the disease, or can actually significantly associated with disease progression. So worsening of the expanded disability status scale. So that's huge. If anyone here needs any sort of push to try and kind of mitigate gluten in their diet, this paper should really help you to be a lot more stern with your friends, or when you go to a restaurant, just tell them that you have celiac, so that you don't feel any pressure to just eat something because you think you should, because, you know, you don't want to be a pain in the butt, or, you know, make yourself stand out. It seems to be that important. And the papers, there's more papers all the time. So Please feel free to ask me any questions about this. It's a biggie. Some of the things that we might switch wheat with is, believe it or not, ta-da-da, kumara toast. So this is actually kumara that you slice into sandwich thickness, and one of the best investments you can ever get is a sandwich press. So you literally will press those kumara bits in your sandwich press, make the rest of your breakfast, and then you can pop on your toppings like avocado, or if you're up for nut butters, that's really yummy too. So I find these to be super helpful. It may be that you change your Weet-Bix to paleo or some other sort of gluten-free cereal, if that would be helpful. There's smoothies that can be great since we're coming into summer. So those are some of the things that I'd definitely try and steer towards. It's really helpful now though, because today we've got so many options for gluten-free, whereas back in the day, I used to try and make these gluten-free bread blocks, but they were definitely so bad. So we're really lucky these days. There's things like doing root vegetables more. So instead of toast or couscous, just going back to your original good old-fashioned root veggies can be fantastic. So please tell me I haven't scared you too much on this, but it is a biggie. So what happens with wheat is, if this is the gut lining, let me show it here. So here's your amazing digestive tract. So from hole to hole, you've got about 10 meters of digestive tissue. And if we were to cut this little bit here out and look at it transversely, you've got millions and millions of these little fingers called villi. So they are there because there's so much more surface area for you to be able to digest food, little tiny micro amounts of food through this lining. So if we were to look at this under the microscope, it would just be one cell thick. So foods will either go through, usually they'll diffuse through, or through the cell. Now what happens is everybody, when you eat gluten, does get some form of splaying of the cells. So it's not just those who have celiac that this is destroyed. Hang on a minute, let me rephrase this. So what gluten does is it will separate the cells of the gut lining, which means that large particles, even pathogens that can't get through the blood, can get through into the digestive system, through into the bloodstream, and it can cause major problems for our immune response. And that is now published. There's literature on this coming out all the time. So gluten is a major cause of these gaps happening. So they call that intestinal permeability in relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. So, okay, I'll shut up now about gluten, right? But it would be something that we're looking at doing. We do a lot more testing of intestinal permeability. Other things that will separate the gut lining is coffee, alcohol, but I wouldn't say stop drinking coffee, because what's life worth living without coffee? But gluten would be a major start. It would be fantastic. And interestingly enough, if you're looking at the gut lining and which diets are really helpful, Mediterranean diet's helpful, low FODMAP is quite helpful. That's for people who have real problems with bloating. The gluten-free diet and the vegan vegetarian, the ketogenic diet, this is after a month. So I'm not sure whether or not a longer study would show different results, but quite possibly. So what do we want to do? We want to try and make sure that those cells aren't going to be open in these gaps. One thing that's been really interesting that I just covered a slight bit before is about fasting. So what happens in the gut lining, and which is like Star Trek interesting, wow, is you have these amazing things called a crypt. And this little part down here is where you have stem cells that help to produce the rest of this, like a conveyor belt, pushes all these ones up. Now you want this to be healthy, because right down here in the pan of the cells, all of this area, you produce these natural antibacterial chemicals. So you want it. It's super helpful. When you fast, you actually help to shed all of the old cells, and you help to create new stem cells that mean that your gut ends up being regenerated. That is phenomenal. So when it comes to fasting, the great thing about giving your gut a break is that you literally see quite a significant change and regeneration of the gut lining. And we know that the gut lining is absolutely critical for immune function, but also for reducing inflammation. Now, the 5-day fasting is where started the research on this 5-day fasting, or it's mimicking the fast. So you're still eating, but the calories are lower, is Longo. Now, his research looked at what happens to the immune system after you break the fast, and they were showing that you actually have a huge increase in T cell function and lymphocytes, which was part of your surveillance. So not just important for cancer, but also for multiple sclerosis. So what they looked at was a 5-day mimicking fast for mice. So I think it wasn't quite 5 days, I can't remember the number, but it was a duration long enough that it caused regeneration in the myelin sheath. So you can see the difference between this and this. So the fasting mimicking diet, which is his research. So if you want to look into it, you just type in, his name is Walter Longo, and you'll search for fasting mimicking diet or just fasting, or you can put in fasting and multiple sclerosis, and you'll come up with some really good literature to read. So I'm a big fan of his work. I think it's amazing. What we're missing in our diets these days is some good quality normal food. So this to me is normal food, not so much the refined stuff. What we used to grow a lot of is heritage variety fruits and vegetables. So those are the things that are old-fashioned. They look weird. They might be quite motley. For example, tomatoes. So tomatoes never used to be this type of shape. They would be slightly purple. They'll have lots of crinkles in them. And the heirloom varieties are not bred to, or they're bred to look a certain way or to have a high yield, which means that they grow, and the amount that the weight of the end product is something that will mean that they get more money for it. So if we look at some of the foods that we used to get, these have much more or higher levels of something called sylvestrols. Sylvestrols are critical for immune function. So the older the variety that we have, if you remember grandma's old lemon tree over the back fence, or the grapefruit tree around the side, anything that's really, really old, usually those are the kind of vegetables that we want to grow. So if you're ever wanting to grow your own vegetables at home, look for heirloom or heritage variety seeds, because you are bound to get more nutrients out of those. Yeah, so not so good, the higher yield hybrids. So these are bred to be that color. And like I just said before about our common minerals that we're deficient in New Zealand, so zinc, selenium, iodine and boron, super, super important. If you find that you've got white spots in your nails, that's usually zinc deficiency. That's vital for immune function. You want for good skin. Selenium, we actually roughly get only 10 to 20% of our selenium a day. So all you need to do for that is 3 Brazil nuts or 2 Brazil nuts. For zinc, we'd look for nuts and seeds. They're really high in oysters, but who can afford those every day? So I do actually tend to recommend people get a zinc supplement. Clinicians is a really good brand. Just a couple of drops in your morning drink before you head to work is a great way to do it. Iodine, we don't have much in the soil. This can be added in things like kelp salt or seaweed. Really good thing in winter is to pop that into your soups and things like that. Boron, we probably need to get in a supplement in New Zealand if it's possible. So I think those are really important things to to bring in. Another thing for autoimmune is making sure you're getting enough omega-3s. So if you're not a fan of salmon or sardines, then a good supplement would be really good. Cod liver oil is fantastic because it also has vitamin A, and that's critical for immune, especially if you have things like long COVID. Here's the pate I was talking about, and this is the cheapest way of accessing your B vitamins, iron and folate. It's liver. So if you're not keen on that, then pate can be a really good way of popping that onto some rice crackers or something like that. You guys are going good because I'm just talking my way through this. Vitamin D. How do you get vitamin D? You get it from the sun. So in the summertime, vitamin D it's not actually a vitamin, it's a hormone, and it's immune modulatory. So in the wintertime, it's one of the reasons that we get sicker, because our vitamin D level drops off. Think about vitamin D like money you put into a bank account, and every week there's a certain amount that gets withdrawn. So the more you top it up, the more that level will rise. We don't want it to get too high in the blood. I like it personally to be up between 120 to 150. This is in a blood test. So 120 to 150 is, I feel really happy. The lower it is, the more likely you are to get all sorts of seasonal flus. Usually the ones I see that have had their bloods done that are really low are my cancer patients and immune compromised. So I cannot stress how important vitamin D level is. If you don't get your blood levels checked, usually your specialist will give you one dose every month for 50,000 IUs, international units. So that's a simple thing you can do, is I'll just give it to you without doing bloods. But if you want to know, usually you have to pay for it yourself. It's not a funded test, although it should be. It's so important. Here's where you can get vitamin D. If you like mushrooms like me, put them upside down like this on your windowsills and let the sun hit them for a little while before you cook them. So that's a biggie. No one really does caviar every day. Egg yolks, fantastic, but if you can, make sure they're free range organic. Otherwise, go to the markets on the weekend and get your eggs from someone that you know what they feed those chickens. So you guys will get a copy of all this. Now, things that help vitamin D be utilized better in the body is magnesium. So think fish, dark leafy greens. So give me some examples of those that you can think of that come to mind that you eat or you don't eat that we could kind of hide somehow. So that would be things like spinach, kale, collard greens. What else? What do you think about when you walk into the fresh fruit and vegetable shop? It would be the lettuce greens. It could be the rocket. So that kind of stuff. Avocado is a good one. And everyone always talks about dark chocolate. But usually you'd need to eat a significant amount of dark chocolate to be able to get enough magnesium. So I'd probably say a little bit of this, but mostly this. Even though your diet might be adequate with these foods, don't forget that the soil's quite low in magnesium in New Zealand. So I would usually prescribe magnesium supplements. So one of my faves doesn't have to be expensive. Magnesium glycinate or magnesium malate or magnesium citrate. The cheapest magnesium is called magnesium oxide, and it's a really good laxative. Basically, you just poo it out. So if you're wanting something that stays in and absorbs, then those other ones are good brands, and I'm happy to write some down. We'll leave that out for now. Okay, so let's talk about food. Okay, so I am a big proponent of protein. I think animal protein is incredibly important. So fish is my number one. Chicken and quality organ meats do make a huge difference, but each to their own. I'm not attached to anyone avoiding, or doesn't matter if whatever you choose. If you do go plant-based, you need to make sure you eat tons and tons of different types of plants. So for example, if it's beans and legumes, adding in hemp protein, making sure you're getting plenty of nuts and seeds, so you're getting a full array of protein. One of the things about the slide I like is just the fact that it's full of colour. And if we're thinking about our cells, we want to make sure that when your cells replicate, you're going to be giving them tons of good nutrients that help them to replicate the same healthy cell, if not healthier cell. So what we want to be doing is thinking about fresh produce, things that come out of the garden that are high in good quality fats like olives, if we can afford them. Anything that you really love, which try and expand some of those foods as much as possible. So what we don't know about at the moment is how many serves of cruciferous vegetables we should be getting a day. And I think this is something that everyone is not in agreement with, but whatever. Broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kohlrabi, rocket, wasabi, daikon radishes, anything that's going to be in that same family, try and have 1 or 2 serves a day. That's your cruciferous vegetables. So if you like broccoli, awesome. Try and have it on a regular basis. Other cruciferous vegetables is cauliflower. So you guys will have these slides and I can add to these. You might make a little herb spread if you're not really a vegetable person. So this is just a blend of lots of greens, and you can plop it on some crackers or some rice crackers with your pate. Sorry. Okay. So that's those. And then big things. Oh, okay. So, right. If anyone here is struggling with sleep, sleep is a major, major thing to try and recalibrate. We know that stress, especially when there's progression with MS, sleep deprivation and insomnia can be a major trigger for EDSS. So that we know that sleep deprivation is bad. Let's just cover that way. If you're someone that struggles with sleep, adding in iron and B12 can be really critical. So iron you would get from lamb, from beef. You can get a little bit of what they call non-heme iron from plants. But if your iron's low and you don't want to eat red meat, then you can go for a supplement that would be super helpful. B12, incredibly important, and you'd get that from the same. So red meat is your major source of B12. You can't get it really much at all in other foods. B12, interestingly enough, if you're deficient, can be why your insomnia or your sleep is disrupted or you don't get good quality sleep. So if your B12 is less than 400 on a blood test, that would be enough for me to warrant either a B12 jab in the butt from your nurse practitioner or your GP, or to be taking daily supplement of B12. So you'll have these slides too. And I think I'm just about running out of time. So in a nutshell, a diet with ample amounts of vitamins and minerals, antioxidants, and lots of good quality, high vibrant colored plants is the way to go. Plenty of rest and recovery. So one thing I didn't cover actually is that sleep deprivation and circadian rhythm, your sleep cycles, have a massive influence on your immune system. If your immune system's compromised, that's the last thing you want with an MS diagnosis. So sleep is your major priority. And the low exposure to toxins and heavy metals. So think, what do you put on your skin? Is it natural? What's the largest surface area that of your skin that you're putting on? So is it a moisturizer that has fragrances, and not quite sure what some of the words mean? I'd probably say it's not something that I'd be wanting to put on my skin. The gut issues is something that we're actually testing for more all the time. So that might be something to look into. And maybe this area all you focus on is cutting out gluten, you'll be doing a really great job. Exercise, you can't beat that. Exercise is amazing. The research on exercise for autoimmune and increasing your natural killer cells and your lymphocytes and all of those good, really healthy immune cells is just, there's lots of good research on that now. And number 2's every day is an important factor, so that's something to watch out for as well. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm just, so that's really important. Lots of laughter. I've got clients with autoimmune conditions, and what we've discovered is that they feel better when they spend the first 3 minutes putting on a comedy show when they're getting dressed. So anything that you do that makes you feel good and makes you laugh, laughing increases immune system. So bring it on, and definitely cutting out sugar is helpful. So I'll leave it there, and then if you have any questions, I think we'll leave that up to you guys. So I'll stop the share. And thank you for listening to my droning voice, everyone. I can't hear you.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Kaytee. That was fantastic. We do have one question. I'm currently reducing my dairy intake. I've gone from a dairy lover to switching to oat milk. You mentioned eggs and dark chocolate. What would be the top dairy product to drop? And what can I still have the odd treat of?
I love that question. So eggs aren't dairy. Eggs are from chickens. So the chocolate, the darker the chocolate, then the darker the chocolate, the more you can have it. So like if it's 95%, there's not as much dairy in that. So I think that could be a really good one. The eggs, interestingly, seem to be quite a high, if you're doing food intolerance testing, eggs come up quite regularly. So what I'd usually say for anyone with autoimmune is you would do what they call the 4-day rotation. You'd have them on Monday, but not Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you would introduce them again on Friday. So Monday on, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off, and then Friday back on for eggs, just to see how that goes.
Thank you. Another question around what are your thoughts on the role of lectin for leaky gut and autoimmune disease?
Yeah, we're big on that now. There's a guy who made that famous a while ago, and we started using his book, Stephen Gundry, it must be about 5 years ago, and found it to be really helpful. And that's what part of the AIP diet is based on. The autoimmune protocol diet is based on low lectins. So let me show you the AIP. I think I put it away, but if anyone wants a copy of that, I'll send that to Nicola. But yeah, the low lectins diet for most people with an autoimmune does help, but it's very restrictive. And then what you do is, okay, so what I'll do, this is what I do. I would do a leaky gut test or gut permeability test before you started, so you knew where you were at. And then you do a low lectins diet based on Stephen Gundry for, I think it's like 3 or 4 months. And then do another leaky gut or gut permeability test to see how well you'd healed your gut. If it's healed, then you would slowly reintroduce foods one at a time, and usually you need to be doing that like very, very slowly, and see. Usually your body will tell you what foods it's not happy with. But if anyone wants more information on that, it's Stephen Gundry is his name, and he's written a few books on low lectin diet.
Okay, somebody is newly diagnosed and taking vitamin B complex supplement. Considering carnitine and coenzyme Q10, will they help with bowel movements?
Oh, good question, Moira. So the B complex supplements is going to be helpful for adrenal function, for part of well, sharks, B vitamins are important for what they call the Krebs cycle, which is your metabolic function. So they usually won't help with bowel movements. What was the other part of the question? Sorry, Nicola, what was the... Oh, okay, yeah, so consider, okay, so carnitine and CoQ10, they are more for helping with energy production. So carnitine is brilliant. You can only really get it if you eat animal protein, otherwise as a supplement, which you're talking about. Great for heart health and great for part of your energy cycle, so how your body actually makes something called ATP or energy, but they don't help with bowel movements. And what I would say, Moira, is go and get your thyroid checked, because bowel movements with MS, autoimmunes don't always just come in one, they can come in clusters. So the other one that I see a little bit is Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune of the thyroid. So the blood tests you want to assess for that is TSH and T4, and don't forget T3 and something called TPO. So it's TPO antibodies. If you have Hashimoto's, usually your thyroid is in low functioning. So everything's turned down. You're colder, your nose is cold, your hands are cold. Everything's turned down, including your digestion, which means that you don't go every day, which you should. So if you're wanting things that help, number one, obviously you'd be checking your thyroid, because that's a key thing for autoimmune. The other thing would be magnesium is a lifesaver. So what you start with is 400 milligrams of magnesium in the evening, and it pulls water into the bowel, so it actually helps to soften your stools, and usually that can help to kind of make you regular. So that's what I would be looking into. Yeah, or things like senna tea. So senna tea can help with bowel movements, and you should be able to get that from your health food shop, SENNA, senna tea. A couple of those, try those first.
Can you use OptiFast as part of a fasting diet?
Oh, good question. OptiFast is protein, so no, because what you're trying to achieve with fasting, hang on, what kind of fasting? Are you wanting to just do a short or a long fast? Maybe write that down. What's the purpose of your fast? Do you want to do the extended, like a 5-day fast? Or is it just to kind of lose weight? And I'll pull up the fasting while you type that in. Show you what this looks like.
Short and lose weight.
I love it. Okay, so wow, why not? Yeah, you can. Let me pull this up and I'll show you. Okay, so you would have heard about fasting, right? So you've got what they call time-restricted feeding, which is when you're only eating in a certain window of time. So see where this green line is? Say you start your breakfast at 8 and then you have a really large meal from 1 to 2, and then you don't eat again until 8 o'clock starts again. I mean, this is extreme, but this is just an example. That is time restricted feeding or calorie restriction. So time restricted feeding is when you get things like this happening: cognitive improvement, reduction in body weight, reduction in blood glucose. You become more insulin sensitive, you'll be able to burn body fat a lot faster. So for example, if you did 16-8, which is an 8-hour eating window. So say you started your first meal at 10 o'clock, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you finished it at 6 p.m., that is a 16-8 window of eating. So just doing that alone and you put your OptiFast in that 10 till 6, then yeah, of course you could, because you're still only eating within a certain window of time. But OptiFast is dairy based. So once you finish that, you may want to go to, well, it depends. You could go to a pea-based, but that has lectins. But if the OptiFast works for you and all your blood markers are doing awesome, then big thumbs up. Yeah, okay, sorry. Hope that answered the question.
The Jelinek diet insists that you do not eat any meat, eggs, and dairy products. What is your opinion on this?
Oh, great question. So there are some people that end up with autoimmune to things like lamb and beef. I would say that if it works for you, go for it. And the only way to know is to try it out. And I spent too long in the start of my clinical practice thinking that whatever people told me at university is absolute gospel, and actually it's not. So if that works for you, then absolutely go for it. The one thing I would say is that you may just want to try and figure out how you get that increased protein, because it can be quite hard. Yeah, muscle mass, you don't want to lose muscle mass.
How do you know if you have leaky gut?
You can test for it. So it's a lactulose and mannitol solution that you consume, and then you collect your urine over the next 6 to 8 hours. I think it's 6 hours. So what happens is, as that solution goes down your digestive tract, the carbohydrate molecules are quite big. And if you have gut permeability, they literally will end up falling into the holes and going into the bloodstream, which ends up in the kidneys, and you end up peeing out those carbohydrate molecules whole instead of your digestive tract digesting them. So you can get that test from NutriSearch, and it's about $200. So we do them all the time. Yeah, I think it's a really good test.
Someone's asked about soy-based foods, such as soy milk.
Oh, okay. I used to say, yeah, go for it, but now not so much. But as an alternative to milk, it could be a good starting transition. But it can be problematic for some people. So I would probably have the same rotation as eggs. So if you have it on a Monday, give your immune system a chance to recover. It's a no-no for the AIP diet, the autoimmune paleo diet, and for most of the others, it's also a no-no. I think possibly one of the reasons why is because most soy is really, really heavily sprayed with glyphosate, which is a herbicide product, and it's now 100% proven to cause leaky gut, and it may be half of the problem that we're having is just too much of this residue in our food. So yeah.
There's just an extension to the question on the Jelinek diet, which is, what protein would you take to replace the meat, eggs, and dairy products?
Yeah, good question, Mike. So you would have to go plant-based. So it would have to be hemp, pea, like bean-based, and tofu. So those are the ones that usually people do, which they're lectins, so they can cause more leaky gut. So hence the reason why trying it out to see if it works for you is helpful. Go with plant-based instead. So you'd need to eat quite a significant amount of it.
Just one last question, Kaytee, and that is about the mimicking fasting you mentioned, and would that be under a GP or a nutritionist?
There's not many that do it in New Zealand. I'll show you. So this is the guy that started the research off. So what you can do, this is a very good book to read, The Longevity Diet by Walter Longo. So he's the one that has looked at the literature on this, and you can buy his Prolon kit. I think you can actually buy it via Australia. There's a guy that's been bringing it in, and literally it's 5 days of food. Don't cause they're so low in carbohydrates that they don't cause cellular growth. I'll show you what I mean. So yes, so this is available in New Zealand, I'm pretty sure now, but I just made my own version, which I'm happy to share. It's just a little thing I made up because this is expensive. You don't need a doctor unless you are on prescription medication, which many people on this may be. If they are, the things that can drop is blood glucose if you have a high carbohydrate diet. So that's something to just be aware of. If you do eat a lot of carbohydrates, you'll find this really tough to start with. So I'm happy to help anyone through this 5 days. The one thing to be aware of is you do lose a little bit of weight. So that's quickly put back on. But I think one of the most intriguing things about this is in 2016, a Nobel Prize was won for the discovery of autophagy, which is literally when you put the body into a form of starvation, it will start to any sort of damaged DNA, any sort of damaged cells, damaged mitochondria. It brings it into a recycling station, and you end up using it and recycling some of these debris. So the only time that autophagy happens is when you're in starvation mode or when you exercise. So those two things are what causes autophagy, and it's a really good way of cleaning the system up. So Volta Longo's research, based on those 5 days of fasting mimicking, which is literally, this is the plan, is based on the remyelination of myelin sheaths on 1, 2, 3 consecutive months where you do 5 days of fasting. So that's part of what he's looking into his research in at the moment. But it's not easy. I've done it, and I was so freaking hungry and lost a couple of kilos. But these are some of the incredible things that you get of it. You get a large stem cell surge, increases autophagy and apoptosis, which are basically really helping to clean up some of those old debris cells. So if you're interested, this is the book that would be your next step, is The Longevity Diet by Volta Longo. You really enjoyed that book.
Just a couple more questions about the carnivore diet, and seems to be working.
Brilliant. So yes, I've been using this for probably about 2 years, and I think it's amazing. The only problem is, what the heck do you do when you're wanting to try and reintroduce foods back in? So this is, I'm in love with the carnivore diet. I think it's fabulous, but I haven't seen enough literature. I'm only doing it with my really severe autoimmunes. So I've got lupus, a couple of lupus women, and I've got one MS man who we've been putting on carnivore. And so far it's going awesome. However, I think what's missing is the prebiotic fibers and probiotics, because once you go to meat, you're missing a lot of these incredible microbiome bacteria. And part of the reason that we may be in this mess with autoimmune is because our gut is so messed up in the first place. So it's good, but what happens, you want to come off it. So yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I love it. I think it's amazing. But many may not agree with me, but I think once you start seeing results, you'll just stay on it. So I think if it's working for you, that's awesome.
just one very last question, Kaytee. What is your pick of non-dairy milks?
Okay, so if we're going for like purity, I would do canned coconut cream. That would probably be my pick. Don't forget that all Tetra Pak cartons are lined with plastic, and there's a heavy metal in that plastic that we've been seeing in provocation tests is coming up quite high. So I'd say if you can handle it, I'd just get some coconut milk or coconut cream, and where the ingredients is just coconut on the back. So that might not be helpful for your coffee. Shit. Otherwise, I do quite like, and it's a nut, it's a cashew nut. You just basically mix it in a blender with some water and make a really nice thick a cashew cream. But again, it can be high in lectins. So if we're just being a purist, I'd say coconut milk would be the best. Sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear.
Thank you so much, Kaytee Boyd of the Boyd Clinic. You can Google them up if you want more information or to get in touch with Kaytee. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone here tonight. And thank you everyone who has taken time out of their evening as well to join us. So thanks again, Kaytee, for a wonderful talk.
It was a privilege. Thank you guys. Thanks for putting the time in for yourselves.
Good night, everyone.